Jake Feinberg Show. Broadway, this is the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you live on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live. Download our free app and stream all of our live local programming, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. We can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. And what a great way to, in our new digs, to open up our new digs, to bring back an old friend of the program, a cat that I consistently admire from a distance, and the vibrations that he gives off from the bass instrument. He's on the road more than he is at home these days, creating improvisation within formulaic set lists with many titanic musicians, still in good health, still rocking out, still cogent, and we still are moving in forward motion. Leland, Sklar, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
I have to go now. I'll talk to you later.
Hey, bud.
Jesus, I heard your ad for dental implants. I just had to have one the other day. I wish I'd have talked to you first. I might have gone to your people.
They botched it? It didn't work out so well?
Oh, no, it's great. I actually had them do the tooth in rosewood. If it was good enough for George Washington, I thought a nice. I was going to go with Bubinga, but didn't want to get hassled at the airline.
I mean, it's just great to talk to you again, man. I wanted to start. I wanted to read you something that you told me, and then allow you to just expand on it.
I was lying. Don't believe anything.
Well, listen to it first, and then you can
Okay.
then you can decide.
I know me.
Leadership, in my mind, is involvement. And I've always prided myself on being involved. I jump right into the thick of everything, always throw out suggestions, and goof around with everybody to keep the energy level high. And it goes on to this long thing about working with, you worked with so many cats, but can you just expand on the idea of how you continue to inspire through leadership, through being involved and putting yourself. I remember Michael Shreve told me, he said, how do you expect the audience to go there if you're not willing to go there first? And I just wanted you to talk about.
That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah, so just riff on that, really.
Well, the thing is, I've always, your chops are one thing, but especially I find this more in the studio than live. I've always considered a big chunk of my gig is really like a cheerleader. You get on a session, and there's a lot of guys I know that are fabulous musicians, but they do their part, they sit there, but they're kind of like a lump of coal, and they bring no energy or vibe. When they play, they do it, but there's another level on a session that you really want to have that excitement of the moment caught on tape or digital or whatever your format is. And I think one of the things I really enjoy is the camaraderie of a group of musicians in the studio, and just keeping the atmosphere light, and that keeps the enthusiasm high. People don't start to get into a funk or looking at their watch going, when is this going to end, kind of an attitude. And I think it's a real critical part of the gig. It's not anything you can really train for or anything. But, I know a number of players like that. When we get in the studio, we're having fun the whole time. When the red light comes on, we're dead serious. But with that seriousness also comes kind of a frivolity and just a kind of a joy in the fact that we're blessed enough to have this be our vocation.
Could you kind of like analogize between the old guard, the Crosbys and the Nashes, who then they were always, well, you never really kind of knew what state of mind they were necessarily in, David specifically, but like the old school cats versus my generation, kids in their 30s. You work with so many younger cats.
Yeah.
Is there a difference? I just look at my generation being more how should I put this? The levity. There's so much pressure. Like you said, there are no concept LPs anymore. So there's EPs. You got to cut this stuff. You're paying for this time. It's all bottom line stuff. Some people have, can you cross over between the old guard and the new?
I think the enthusiasm that I'm talking about and the attitude would be the same if you're doing an extensive LP or if you're doing a single. It really comes down to the individual performance of the individual song. Certainly, in the old days, I worked with a lot of pant loads that you'd get in there, and you just half the time the artists wouldn't even show up. So worrying they're even guessing at what key they're going to do it in, making assumptions. But it really comes down to the rhythm section. The most, as far as I'm concerned, keeping the energy level and all that going. A lot of young artists, I feel bad for them because, when I look at somebody like Bonnie Raitt, and you think, before Nick of Time, she had an extensive catalog that just was more of a cult following, but the label stuck it out with her, mm-hmm. and just on just knowing she was good enough that at some point something was going to happen. And then when Nick of Time happened, then all of a sudden her back catalog came roaring back and people got into her. A lot of new artists now are never going to have the chance to have a back catalog. They get like one shot, and that's pretty much it. And a lot of the people I work with at this point are financed by something other than a label. And if that person who's putting up the money doesn't see an immediate return, they're not going to contribute more and more unless it's maybe a family thing and they're just bankrolling their kid who's maybe is talented and deserves an opportunity. But it's a lot more pressure on them when we go in the studio. For me, I go in the studio, I'll work on somebody's thing, and they're living and dying by that session, and I'm leaving after that and going off to do something else.
Right.
So it doesn't affect me on that level, but I take pride in what I do, and I want every performance that I do to be the best I can possibly do, even if I'm not, completely enamored with the song or the artist. I still, if I said yes when the phone call came, it's my obligation to go in and do the very best job I possibly can.
I just want you to be clear. You're in the thick of it. So because we don't have a record industry anymore, you're talking about like sponsors, like beer sponsors that are supporting them?
Well, there's people that I've been doing albums with, and some of them are unbelievably great albums. Mm-hmm. And sometimes these are older artists that have had success in the business world, and they have the resources to put together their dream band and go in and make a record. But they're personally paying for it. Or I just finished doing a project with this girl from Singapore, and her family is bankrolling her. She's a really, really good singer-songwriter, and she's I think turning 16. And we put together this ridiculously great band and went in and cut about 8 songs for her, and the family paid for it. And what they're going to do with that I don't know, and that's where my involvement ends.
Right. No, we talk. Listen, just for the audience listening worldwide, Lee and I are doing an oral history of Lee Sklar at this point. This is interview number 5, and we talked about the idea of saying, well, what do you do with it once it's made? And do you see any seeds? Like you do a lot of traveling. Like when you're with like Phil Collins or someone like that. I mean, are you seeing younger bands that maybe you saw 10 years ago and they're still on the circuit, either opening for you or you run into them? I guess what I'm trying to say is that give me a little bit of hope beyond the idea of saying, okay, Journey and Steve Miller and Carlos said they're going to go and do their hits from 30 or 40 years ago. I mean, is there can you point to some younger bands that are inspiring you?
I hear music that inspires me, but I don't necessarily always follow through as to who it is. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure if they're a younger band or if they are a band that's been around a while. Because I'm kind of almost freaking out the fact that I'm as busy as I am, and so I really don't have time to kind of sit back and just check out the scene. I'm spending the majority of my time on the road, and when I'm not, I'm in the studio. But it's really kind of shocking to me, really how busy I am. And when it comes to, like with Phil Collins, we've never had an opening act with Phil, so I don't really see who's out there. And I'm going out with again with Judith Owen. We just finished doing some promo gigs for her new album release, but we're going to spend the month of March opening for Brian Ferry on his U.S. tour. So I'm going out with an opening act, and so it's I'm kind of seeing all sides of this, but. I never want to discourage young artists out there, because there are things going on. When I pick up like the L.A. paper and I look at what's going on in town, there's a ton of names that I've never heard of, but they're playing the club circuit here. Clubs aren't what they used to be, so it's more and more difficult to find places to really basically hone your skills. When I was younger, I could literally walk into some clubs back in the 60s carrying a bass over my shoulder,
right,
with a cord wrapped around it and a strap, and sit in with bands. That world doesn't exist anymore, but it gave me a chance to meet people, because so much of this business is who you know, who you meet. It's all that kind of networking, and it's more and more difficult now. But again, there's like young artists out there that are really amazing, that I still end up working with in their teens and 20s, but I'm turning 70, so I'm not really in the middle of the young band scene.
Well,
so it's,
no, you're carrying the torch as a musician. Lee, I want you to listen. I interviewed. Are you familiar with the chanter singer Krishna Das?
Oh yeah.
So I interviewed him yesterday, and he said,
"Cool.
I wanted you to listen to this and riff on this, because you talked about the cats in the studio who, they barely have a pulse outside of maybe playing their instrument. But this is interesting, and I want you to talk about your own personal evolution." He said, "This is Christian Das is your age. Now, he didn't really find his, voice until like the early 90s. He was a pretty tortured soul." He said, "Musicians learn how to access that timeless place, how to get to a place where you're not thinking. You're freed from your personality temporarily. And musicians get dependent on that, so their personal lives usually fall apart more and more. They never learn how to open up and do that here. They have to go somewhere else in the music world to enjoy. I met a lot of musicians like that who are incredible musicians, but their personalities are so tortured. It's the same longing, but there's a lack of understanding of how to access that place within us." Now, I mean, you're not a guru or a shaman, you are, but you've been on the bandstand a long time, and I just would like you to talk a little bit about how you learned. What he's talking about basically is accessing this timeless place on the bandstand, but then being unable to really translate that over to real life. And I want to know how you've been able to modulate that. I mean, you claim you're freakishly busy now. I have suspicions as to why, but can you talk about your evolution as a human being on the earth?
Oh boy, that's a pretty deep moment there. I'm not so much looking at what I do from sort of that spiritual kind of a evolvement. I just have always really been kind of open to everything around me. I try to be sensitive to the people around me and to the environment that I'm in. And embrace it. It's like when you go on the road and people say, what towns do you like? And I go, I really like every town. You have to go into that town with an enthusiasm to experience it. And you might be, one day you're in London, and then I fly off to do something, and I'm in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I loved going to Lincoln, Nebraska. I'll go find a park, or I'll go to junk shops and find some funky little diner. To me, but it's always keeping a positive enthusiasm about everything that you do. And to me, that translates into the music. That's why when I go in the studio, I really kind of suss the room out as quick as I can. You know, I might be meeting the engineer or the second engineer at that studio for the first time, and I immediately go and say hi, you know, talk to them and develop a rapport. I'm thrilled when I go in the studio and I'm working with musicians I've never met before. And
why? Why is that?
Because to a certain extent, we've all been, at least like in LA, I experienced this, where you kind of get cubbyholed and you get put together with certain rhythm sections that people are real confident in. So they call the same guys to be together all the time because there's a confidence that we all know each other and that we can get the job done really efficiently and everything. But if I walk in and I suddenly meet a new drummer, I just go, oh, God, this cat's great. And then the next thing I know, somebody calls me and goes, can you recommend a drummer? And then I'll immediately suggest that guy because I really enjoyed playing with them, where their expectation might be that I would say somebody else. But I go, no, you know, you're going to really dig them. Because I really think this is all very fluid, and it doesn't mean I don't enjoy playing with the guys I've played with for all these decades. It just means that there's this fluidity of people coming into our lives that to me you really need to be open to and embrace, because each new guy I play with affects my playing, and maybe I'm not going to play what I would normally have played had I been with somebody else. So it makes me think a little bit differently, and it keeps me fresh.
How have you dealt with cats that you love dearly, but they like Krishna Das says, they're tortured souls off the bandstand. They can't get, they know how to access this place, this timeless, this not TikTok time environment, but they can't put them. How have you? I mean, even without mentioning any.
Well, it's weird. I really don't know that many people that are tortured.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, I mean, most of the people that I work with and that I know, I mean, everybody's got issues in their lives, and I've dealt with you know a number of people that have committed suicide in their lives, and I never saw the torture that they obviously had buried somewhere in their soul that none of us were ever privy to, because it's a constant discussion every time we get together. As to what the hell happened? Why didn't we see something? But I would say most of the people I know, other than just the kind of normal day in and day out crap people deal with in their lives, I really don't know that many people that are, I would consider a tortured soul. Most guys bring a pretty good attitude to work, and most guys work very hard and take great pride in their craft. And I think we all feel incredibly fortunate that we have this profession that, especially in this day and age, I mean, there's some stuff going on in the world that is, to me, torturous. But the idea that we can go in to a venue, and for people who may be having a really terrible day, for a couple of hours, they're smiling, they're having a great time, and it's a great form of escapism. So I think we're incredibly fortunate on that level. And when I work with Judith Owen, she is one of the most incredible writers I've ever worked with. And there's people that come up after the shows every time in tears talking about how one of the songs for them they connected with so deeply, because she has one of the songs is about when her father was dying, and the fact that there was a time where they were no longer there, and you couldn't talk to them, and the way she makes it so succinctly poignant in her writing, and people come up and go, you know, I just lost my wife, or I just lost my kid, and I can't believe, you know, what you've addressed in this. It's an amazing opportunity to connect with people, and I think we all take that very seriously. And I never want to walk off stage thinking that I didn't give my best that night for those people.
I just want to, you know, it's 20 past the hour here. We're on the phone with live on Power Talk with Leland Sklar. I just I'm reading off a feed here that we've just lost Clyde Stubblefield, the drummer.
Oh, you're kidding.
No,
Gee.
this is okay. So
They're going. You know, we're at that
well,
point
you
now.
know, and this is I actually wanted to ask you: did you ever collaborate with David Axelrod?
No, I knew David by name, but I never had the pleasure of collaborating with him.
I was hoping you'd be on like one of those funky heavy axe sessions that we never knew, because I knew like Hugh Art got the call for that, and you know, we have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I want you to listen to this voice now, and then we'll.
I'm really hideous at this.
No, you're going to really enjoy this, and then we'll come back. Okay.
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 And they weren't opposed to trying anything, you know, really. I mean, when I think of Russ and Lee and Danny and, you know, all those James Taylor sessions we did, I mean, I remember Danny and James sitting in the side room at the Sound Factory. The control room was on the right side, had a room that was isolation, and then the room in front. And I remember them sitting in there sort of just jamming. James was all set up because we were tracking some song. I don't remember what we were tracking, but he was sitting there with an acoustic guitar, and Danny was, and they started playing Handyman. And I'm listening to them over the mics, and Peter and I looked at each other, and we went, holy shit, that's such a great idea. We go running out and go, oh, my God, you guys got to do that. And they went, James goes, I'm not cutting another oldie. So that's where that started, and that took, like, you know, 2 days. You got to do this.
You pushed them, and they finally did it.
And eventually they did it. But, you know, it's funny, people's reactions to things, you know.
How did you... All right, Mr. Sklar, who is that? Who is that?
God, no, I'm seeing. I can't put a name. I'm blanking right now.
Okay, you're blanking. It's a dear friend of yours, Val Garay.
Oh, it's Val. Okay, yeah.
So I had a chance to interview Val, and he was.
I knew the nasal quality.
You know, I mean, he was. You know, and that cat is so sharp. But he was talking about on the fly a lot of times. I guess maybe one time Russ may have played a tape box as a drum kit.
That was on. God, hold on, give me one second. Traffic Jam. Traffic Jam.
Can you?
We were trying to find a drum sound, and nothing worked, and they finally pulled out some cardboard boxes that the drums had come in, and that's what Russ played. It's like buying your cat a wonderful toy, and then the cat, next thing you know, is in the bag that the toy came in going crazy.
I mean, I just want you to talk. This is so important because obviously we live in this full-on digital realm now. Everything from intimacy to music is all digital now, and I wanted you to talk, if you go back in time, even to the Chitlin circuit, when you maybe had just kind of indigenously create something on the fly, or just you found a sound. I mean, you talked about bringing foam pads to a Herb Peterson dates, you know, like.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that, the creativity that you exude? I mean, part of it is going in, like you said, scanning the room, knowing the peeps, feeling it out. But at the same time, it's also like, oh, this is not a big deal. We can problem solve this. We can find something. It's about ingenuity. I want you to talk about your definition of ingenuity, and then maybe some examples of even recently of how you've, just sort of indigenously created sound.
Well, I think one of the things that I always hate saying the old days because I don't want to sound like an old fart, but I've been at this a long time. But back in the early 70s, when we would go in the studio, we could be in for weeks working on a project. So we had the luxury of time to be able to experiment and really do different things. Where now everybody's like, saying, "Look, we got 3 hours. We got to cut 4 songs. We got to get in and out. Blah blah blah." So you really go for your gut instinct. But I remember on one of James's records, I don't know if it was One Man Dog or one of the early ones, he wanted the background vocals to sound different, and there was a line saying "letting the time go by," but to make it sound different, what he did was he sang "letting the time go by," then we played the tape backwards, learned it phonetically backwards, recorded it singing it backwards, then flipped the tape over again. So instead of it going "letting the time go by," it went "letting the time go by," It was
Oh,
the
that is
inflection
true.
control.
That is
well, that's
wow.
the kind of stuff you could never do nowadays, unless you were maybe Sting or somebody that had the luxury of locking themselves up in a chateau for a couple of months and working on their album.
Working on phonetics, yeah.
Yeah, but we had opportunities. I remember at one time with James. James, he had a pretty wide vocal range, and he had some other people come in, and they sang individual tones on a tape, and then we actually used the console as a voice organ, and we orchestrated how to create vocal clusters, and everybody was assigned a couple of faders, and we learned the song, and then ended up playing that. So it was almost like doing something with a mellotron or something like that. We created this whole instrument that hadn't been there before. So we had a lot of chances like that. One of the problems, it's not a problem, but one of the issues with being a bass player, from my standpoint, is it's like when you go into a session and you get there and they've just spent 45 minutes getting drum sounds, working on the kick drum, working on all this stuff, and then I come in and they go, okay, let's hear the bass, and I play two notes, and they go, fine. There's very little opportunity to take things to another level. If I'm working with somebody that gives me that opportunity, I love it. I did Adriana is a song that I did with Vince Gill, and it was about his daughter, I believe. And they were going to do some strings on it, and I said, well, let me try something. And I went in and ended up doing a bunch of chordal fretless things. And the way they were mixed in, it kind of eliminated the need to do a string date. And I'm apologizing to string players who maybe didn't get hired for that thing. But I did that with Phil Collins too on some things where, and on another track, No Other, Gene Clark. On that track, I think I have about 6 basses on that track, from fuzz tone to piccolo to regular parts, but they're all blended and orchestrated in such a way where it still sounds like there's a bass part with all this other stuff going on. But those opportunities for me are really few and far between, because most of the time the people go, we really don't have the time to do that. I love like having a piccolo bass with me, or taking my bass parts and doing a bass part and then doubling it up an octave with, say, a little pitch shift on it or something, to create something that sounds more like an 8-string. But again, it's so much stuff in this day and age is all time related, and they're just going, we got to get in and out of here. So, just give me a great bass part, great tone, and see you later. So I had more luxury to play around back in the old days when we were, spending a lot more time in the studio, and you could really sit there and try all kinds of alternative ideas and chordal things and stuff. So, but I sneak them in when I can.
I mean, can you? I was pleasantly surprised. I had breakfast with Peter Rowan when he was down here in the fall, and he's like, his company or his management team, he said to me, he was trying to think about this he was like, this section. I said, you mean with Danny Korchmar and Lee Sklar? He's like, yeah, he's like, they are trying to I forget whether he was saying go start a tour, but actually it was going back into the studio. And I was like, are you kidding me? And so sure enough, I asked Cooch about 2-3 weeks ago when I interviewed him, I was like, dude, this is quite remarkable in April. So you guys, I just want to be clear though that, I mean, not that you have all the specifics laid out, but are you also in this, even though you're not from you're from the generation that had a lot of time to be creative, are you in the same predicament to be like, well, let's just get these parts down and figure. I mean, can you talk about?
Absolutely not.
Okay, so talk about that.
Right now I'm the fly in the ointment. We had planned on holding a couple of weeks in April, like 3 weeks, to get together, and like we used to do when we originally formed the band. We would go in and rehearse, and we had like an old Sony cassette player with condenser mics in it. We'd set it in the middle of the room, and we would just jam and work out all kinds of ideas. Then we would sit and listen to all of this stuff and hone down songs and grooves and stuff out of that. We were planning on really just following that same route of doing this, and we had wanted to hold the time in April, and the guys were all going, great, great, great. My problem is I immediately get called to do another album with the French artist Eddie Mitchell, and that's going to be the first 2 weeks of April. Then I've got to go to Washington, D.C. to do this gig I do every year at the Library of Congress for ASCAP. And all of a sudden, April for me just turned to crap.
You become a fly in the ointment. I mean, this is now it's going to be put. So when are you not busy though?
Well, that's the problem. So now we're going to kind of hold off till later in the year. I'm committed right now, work-wise, up until August. Mm-hmm. Between Judith Owen and Phil Collins and some album projects, I'm slamming until the end of July. So we'll try to get together at that point because the Grammy Museum wants us to come and do an evening at the Grammy Museum here in L.A., and we would like to get together and do some rehearsals and maybe be able to go there and present some new material and do a performance. Plus, one of the things that I think is really important is when we did a gig with James Taylor back at the Pantages Theater back in the 70s, we were the opening act for him at that time as the section, and this was towards the end of us. And at that point, David Lindley had also joined the group. So we've got this video that was filmed that night, and it was recorded on 24-track. We're organizing, getting all that back together, and then trying to release a live performance video from that. And I've seen it, and it's really unbelievably great. But
awesome.
We just did the Kennedy Center honors a few months ago, where they were honoring James Taylor, and as a surprise to him, they brought the four of us back in with Sheryl Crow to do a couple of songs for his induction. And we've, for years, ever since, the band actually broke up, when I'm in Europe or Asia, in Japan, people always come and go, is Section ever going to do anything again? And so we're kind of looking at this as an opportunity, and I just feel like a real asshole because the other guys were holding the time, and for me, it's still, work is work, and I've done a bunch of Eddie Mitchell's records, and I didn't feel it was fair to turn him down to go and rehearse, both financially and also just because I still have my clients that I work with on a regular basis. And I just told the guys. Yeah. I said, look, I want to do it, but I'll do my best. But let's look down the pike a little bit, and we'll try to get this together. So it's still in the planning stage. It's not going to happen in April like we had hoped it would.
If it was, or again, we're talking about the fragility of life here, with Stubblefield and Axl.
Oh yeah.
I guess, but if let's just say, Eddie Mitchell never came, that you had that free time. You guys would have blocked out a few weeks, and how would you have paced yourselves? Ultimately with you, just from your own personal point of view, what would you want to, not come out of it, but during those sessions, what would make you feel the best? You guys are not from the generation of just make it sound good and we got to get out of here.
I think we would have just done what we normally do. We would just go in the room at SIR is where we were thinking of going because we know the people there and we could get a room easily. Just go in and just maybe Russ might start a beat and I would just jump in with something, and then Craig and Cooch would throw something down, and we were really, there might be stuff where, like Craig, he might have been sitting home all this time doing a whole bunch of stuff that I'm unaware of, and he would bring it in. And certainly Cooch is a bottomless pit of grooves and ideas.
Right.
And so they might come in with something that was like 75% there, and then we would contribute to that. So it's hard to say, but it wouldn't be like the thing we're fortunate of is that none of us need this to pay our rent. So we can just kind of do this on our own terms. And if we get together and play and it's great, cool. And if we sit there and maybe a week or so into this, just go, I don't know, it's kind of just not happening, then fine. Then we'll just, enjoy our history. I would not want to do anything that would at all diminish the history that the band had. So it would have to be stuff that was on par, not necessarily, not so much, I'm not going to say chops-wise or anything, because everybody's still pretty much at the top of their game. It's just, we're talking stuff that was, 35, 40 years ago. I don't think that way anymore. We all had life experiences, so it would be interesting to see what we might come up with as a version of this in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's not smoking and not killing us, then you just go, okay, well let's still get together, because I work with Russ on a pretty regular basis, and I try to get together with Cooch as much as I can. Craig lives like 5 minutes from me.
But you go knock on his door, man. I mean, he's such a wonk, man.
Most of his time working. He and Judy, his wife, work together on their music.
Right, she's someone I have to get to as well. She's a wild singer, poet.
Oh, she's nuts. In a great way.
Hey,
a piece of work.
No, I mean it's loud and clear. Lee, I really want to explore this idea with you. Like I talked to Mike Mainieri, the Vibes player, and
oh, yeah.
he was talking to me about a period of time he'd get together with East Coast guys like Joe Beck and Donald McDonald. There wasn't. Can you talk about when your ears grew the most? And what I mean by that is like on the road when you were playing unamplified music, especially on the Chitlin circuit, because I just feel like there's such a propensity now in my mind when I listen to pop music or music on the radio or just in general, such a conscious effort to keep time on the bass drums. Such a double bass drums, and when I listen to the cats, the old school drummers, a lot of them were keeping time on the cymbals.
I hate kick drum.
I mean, can you talk about how your ears grew in the unamplified setting of the not even the Chitlin, it could be Chitlin, but you just weren't plugging in, and you actually were keeping the bottom end, because today it just there's no space and it sounds like machine guns. And I just wanted you to talk about how your ears grew at that time.
I think one of my biggest in terms of contemporary stuff, when I go to a live concert, I get so angry with front of house guys who think the kick drum is the most important instrument on the stage, and you hear nothing but kick drum up there. When I listen back to Beatles records and those old records, I mean, everything was the top of the kit and the bass was the bottom, and you'd hear a little kick drum, but it was supportive. It wasn't a dominant instrument. Even when I was doing the Chitlin gigs, like in the kind of mid-late 60s, I had a little tiny amp and stuff, but I got kind of turned on to that world when I became friends with harmonica George Smith, who was one of the greatest harp players out of Chicago, and he turned me on. Through him, I got to play with Albert Collins and Big Mama Thornton and Pee Wee Creighton, Magic Sam, Jimmy Reed, all these cats. The good thing always was that whenever I did the gigs, I knew I was going to get ripped off, because they were going to get ripped off too by whoever hired them. But it was such an education to be with these cats and doing that circuit of there were nights where you would find yourself sleeping on a pool table after hours and things. But
can you? What I really want you to groove on is this top of the kit use of time. This is so essential for humanity moving forward. What was it?
Well, I think when I listen, especially to drummers like Ringo and Charlie Watts and guys like that, they lay down that drum kit is such a beautiful conduit between the bottom end and the melody. They create such an energy and a vibe there, where I never really was concerned. Like so many sessions over the years, it gets to the point going, well, your bass part's not matching that kick drum pattern.
Right.
And you're going, well, Jesus Christ, let me play the bass and let him figure out a pattern that fits the bass part. The bass should be the dominant factor in that register, and the kick drum. And it's gotten away from it got away from the double kicks. I mean, double bass drum setups. But with the advent of so many of like the pedal setups now, where guys can sit there with one bass drum and do all kinds of stuff that sounds like they've got three bass drums going, it gets a little at times tedious for me trying to accommodate that. But that once again becomes an individual thing based on the drummer and his understanding of what the bass player does, and it's not all about him and his chops. I love a drummer who can just lay down just a nice pocket. But to me, the pocket really sits between the hi-hat and the snare and toms. It's not that kick drum pattern that's really in the way. I'm just going, God, give me some breathing space in here. This is unnecessary. And guys do get it. I mean, when we're getting ready to go out with Phil Collins, his son Nicholas is going to be our drummer now. And Nicholas is 15 years old. He'll be 16 when we hit the road. And we just spent 5 days doing a kind of a preliminary rehearsal down in Miami. And one of the songs just was not laying well. And Daryl Sturmer and I and Brad Cole sat down with Nick and said, I'll tell you what, simplify that kick drum pattern and focus on this. He's really a fine young drummer and really hungry. And he immediately did what we said, and all of a sudden the song locked in. And I love the fact that it's not like you're going, oh God, it's Dad's kid, so you better not say anything to him. He's so hungry to learn, and it made total sense to him. They said, oh yeah, God, if I simplify that, the rest of this will lay much better. And I really appreciate that with him. I think it's going to make for a great tour.
I could talk to you for hours about, I need you to, so do you think, I'm not trying to say that, this is about sort of ripping out the wiring and then reinstalling it in the sense of, obviously he's young, he's hungry, he wants to have his own individual sound, and he wants to learn from people that, like masters that have been on the bandstand before.
Yeah.
But for cats that are, Rick Murata and I had a great conversation about a month ago, and he made an interesting point, and I'll let you riff on it. And I want you to.
Yeah.
He said that for him, for instance, he didn't even start playing drums till he was 19. He just had natural rhythm. David Spinoza was like, you dance so well, I'd hire you to be my drummer. But he didn't really play drums, and then essentially, like, he was listening to Max Roach or maybe Stubblefield or cats that were so unique and, like you said, primarily using the top of the kit with a little bit of taste at the bottom. But what he said was when the drum machine came in, people, instead of trying to emulate people try to start emulating a machine. And that's why you have a situation today where you have drummers and you can't tell who they are because they've been trying to copy a machine. And that to me was a stunning thing, and it makes total sense because there's this anonymity and formulaic sort of beat that is in everything now. And I just want you to talk about...
I can lay so much blame at the advent of digital technology and machines and all that. I mean, so much of the soul of everything we've done went right down the toilet when that stuff came in, and they started quantizing things and when you ask an engineer or a producer how's it feel, and they're telling you by looking at a stopwatch.
You're seeing that all. I mean, that to me is, what is that feeling? I mean, honestly, you're not a violent person, but what does that feel like, man? I mean, that would be very.
To me, music is fluid and organic, and if you can't have something, say you want it to just to lift emotionally during a chorus and then settle back into a verse, when you're sitting there with machines, and you can't do that. You can't do that the way a group of people would. But I'll tell you one really quick anecdotal story. I was doing a Japanese project And they brought in Billy Payne and myself to put bass and keyboards on this thing. They had already done a bunch of the stuff back in Japan. So we're doing all this stuff. Great. Then they came up with one last song, and it was a waltz kind of feel. And their drummer was there, so they had their drummer play it with us. And we kept trying to cut this track, and they had the click set and all that stuff. And it just sucked. It was not there. And I finally begged the producer. I said, can we play it once without the click track? And we cut it and totally nailed it. And I looked in the drum booth, and the drummer was crying. And I went in, I said, what's going on, man? Are you okay? And this is a Japanese drummer.
Yeah.
He said, I've never played without a click before. I didn't know you could do it.
Oh, it's like, what year was this, essentially?
This was probably in the 90s.
The reliance, so the technology has gotten so deeply rooted inside of us that we overly reliant on it to the point when I thought he was crying because he was in a state of bliss because it was such a beautiful waltz.
Well, he was in a state, he was crying because it was an epiphanal moment for him, having played drums for his whole life and never one time sat down without a click track or a drum or something to play to, not being able to trust his own instincts. It was because for me it was deep because that's the way I still think, and to see somebody experience that was a real moment for me too. It's a real difficult time. People become very untrusting, and also we have ended up in a business where a lot of guys who are making records don't trust themselves, and that's why I get called to go to somebody's house and do bass parts as compared to going to a studio, sitting with a bunch of guys. There's guys who can't assimilate a group of musicians and make it work. They have to hear each instrument one at a time to be able to judge anything, and that to me really diminishes the performance. When I go to somebody's house and I'm sitting at their Pro Tools rig, they may not have the drums on it yet. I might just be playing to a click track. I can't affect anything but my bass part, and I can only do that within certain parameters because I'm stuck with a click track. I can't make it breathe. I can't make it do anything other than a basic part. And that for me is really diminishes my experience. I mean, I'll do the best I can with it, but the difference between doing that and then going in a studio with a group of guys and playing together and creating these parts is a whole other ball game, and it's a different world, you know. And it's come back. I've done a lot more projects in the past couple of years that are maybe 4, 6, 8 guys in the studio together working. And you might be sitting there listening to it going, you know, Jesus, this thing could use a better intro, or it could use, could use a bridge. And the band actually ends up creating it, where if it's just you can't do anything like that. So it's a tough call. I love working and I love being busy, but there's a part of me that misses a great deal of, I don't, again, saying the old days, but there was that.
No, it's true. I mean, there was this, I have become, my show, Lee, on top of everything else, has really become about rhythm and unique rhythm. And you can't get that. Now, I want you to just listen to this for a minute. I'll read you something here. This is from the late, great Butch Trucks, who I had an opportunity.
Oh, God, geez, this was so heartbreaking. I worked with Butch many times, and he and I talked all the time on Facebook. And
I love the man dearly. You know, I did one. I just want you to read this. I want to read this quote to you, and then have you because then I'll give you my theory about. Okay, so because Butch unfortunately took his life, for the audience took his own life about a month ago. He said, what Donald Trump has brought out. And I did this interview before the election in October last year. He said, what Donald Trump has brought out is the way things used to be in this country. White males ran everything. Trump is absolutely right out in the open that everything is wrong because of Muslims. Everything is wrong because of somebody else. Go back to making America great again. What these people hear, his supporters, is that it's time to go back to the 50s when white men ruled everything. Women get back in the kitchen where they belong. And the black people step out of the way when their betters are walking down the street in front of them. Now, okay, I'm not a prophet, and I don't know Butch personally, but I have to believe. I'm 38, Lee. You're turning 70. He is 70 years old. My parents. I don't know psychologically if I went through the civil rights movement the way you guys did, and with Butch, he told this other story about them getting arrested in southern Alabama, which is where Jeff Sessions is from, because J-Mo was in the band. They had a black person with him. Okay. Yeah. Now I have to, you can talk about financial stuff, whatever. I really believe that he did not want to see what we are all seeing right now. And I hate to be cryptic about it, but if
he was incredibly depressed at what he was seeing. And when we talked on Facebook, he was really distressed by everything that's going on right now.
I don't really need you to validate the reasons why. I just want you to talk about how you write stunningly cogent and piercing responses to this individual, this president. But I'd like you to talk about how people can best feel like they are keeping their soul together in their own way. I mean, you're staying busy. You're staying as busy as you can. But for everybody, can you add some pearls of wisdom? I don't want to foster any more hate. I just want to I want people to feel inspired and liberated in this time, in these historical dark times.
Well, I just, for myself, I want people to educate themselves, to not fall prey to dogma and kind of the bullshit that we're hearing thrown out on a daily basis. If you're going to speak about things, try to at least understand what you're talking about and not just bumper sticker phrasing. I think Donald Trump is a profound mistake, anomaly, danger. I think this is a pathetic little man with a monstrous ego who's never had to do anything in his life. I know personally through people that have been ripped off by this guy, and their companies were almost lost because of him telling them to get screwed when it came time to pay for the services that they rendered for him on building projects. I think he and the people I can't believe who he's surrounding himself with. It seems like there's this intentional quality of going out to look for the absolute most unqualified worst people for each position and then putting them in there, and everybody seems to be such cowards that they won't stand up to this bully and say no. But I think that we can't allow ourselves to fall into a morose attitude in this country. I think we have to, because I grew up through the Vietnam War period, and went to marches with my parents and stood up against that. And so much of that, as time has gone on, all the things we were all accused of being traitors and stuff, all turned out to be true. Mm-hmm. And right now we're looking at a really similar thing going on here with his attacks on people. It's affecting the music business. There's orchestras having to cancel their tours because there's so many Muslim musicians in international orchestras that the orchestras can no longer come to the United States because sections of the orchestra will not be allowed in the country.
Lee, I want to ask. This is so important because you talked about this because he's a fraud. I mean, he's a ripoff.
Absolute fraud.
Now, here's the thing. Now, for a lot of there's a lot of rage in this country. You said you go all over the country. What do you say to cats that feel like they've been ripped off? Not by him, but he's channeling their anger. How do they break out of the trance? How do they see the light, man? I mean, really, that's we're preaching to the choir here. But those.
No, I know. Well, there's so many people that live a life of victimization, and they've never really figured out how to get out of blaming everybody else for their woes. And I don't know how you answer that. I didn't come from privilege. I came from a very kind of middle class family, and I worked my ass off my whole life. I never had anything special given to me. I just had a work ethic, and I really cared about the world I live in and try to make it as good as I possibly can. I wish everybody, they don't have to emulate me, but I wish people would not just sit and blame other people for their woes, but would figure out some way to get out of whatever it is that they're feeling trapped in. A lot of times guys I've known have come from families that were non-supportive, that gays that I know who, if their parents found out they were gay, they were immediately, I have no son anymore, kind of stuff.
Right.
I don't know how you recover from that, but I see people, I have people coming on my Facebook page when I make my comments, and I find it just shocking, some of the things that people will come in and say, and I get so much, just play bass and shut up.
It's just like, people are like, Jake, I'll cut and paste in one of your quotes and they won't even read down the whole thing to see that it wasn't me saying it, but they'll say, oh, Jake, you're pretty hot and bothered. And it's like, you know what? I'm not hot and bothered. I saw this coming 6 years ago. I was talking to Richard Davis on my program about this stuff in 2011. I'm liberated, but I'm also going to stay vigilant. I'm not,
absolutely,
because you know what? All I see is this: there are 3 backstops to tyranny, and that is regular peeps, that is the press, and that is the courts. And he has put people in place he is demonizing all 3 of those areas.
Exactly.
And that, to me, those are the 3 backstops. And so it's not that I'm pissed off. I'm just going to stay vigilant. I don't want. Just because the Holocaust in last century was Jewish people, but that doesn't mean it won't be. It could be a different people. We're all one human race.
Well, my neighbor across the street from me, he was in a Japanese internment camp. I know a lot of Japanese people whose relatives their lives were destroyed and they were taken off to internment camps, and they were American citizens. When people turn a blind eye to this stuff. And now they're talking about taking the National Guard and having them go out and do sweeps for illegal immigrants. Well, may as well just put SS bans on them and reopen the internment camps then, and maybe the gas chambers, because this is the mentality that these guys are working from. And as much as they try to hide it, when he goes on and starts his ranting on his tweets, this guy is certifiably dangerous.
I completely agree. I think he's,
but I think if people bury their heads in the sand and deny it, then they're going to get what they're going to get. All these people that sit there and still think he's the guy that's got their back, and then suddenly when they develop cancer and they realize they have no health care and they can't deal with it, and they're going to lose everything and they're going to die from it. It's a little late at that point to try to change things. So I'm just going to be a fly in the ointment as much as I possibly can, and just try to. I always tell people when they come to my page, you don't have to agree with me at all. I'm not saying come here because I'm right. I'm saying if you want a dialogue, at least come and have a dialogue based in fact and not in some kind of fantasy fiction that somebody's spoon-feeding you and you're just believing it. It's not Jonestown and they're just going to hand you a cup of Kool-Aid. So
well,
it's a difficult time, and I'm grateful to be in music and at least have something that can bring people some joy in this madness that we're experiencing every day.
Well, Lee Sklar, I always love talking to you, man, and I got to tell you, I keep being a fly in the ointment, and being proactive and fostering love, and maybe, like I said, I mean, this is sort of, I think the cowardice of certain leaders to not call out the demagoguery and the bigotry is not just going to hurt the people that these Trump supporters. It's going to affect a lot of.
It's everybody.
Yeah,
it's
man, we're all going to get into it, and that's the thing is like I just want to know on my end that I'm doing what I can to push back. So good luck. We'll be in touch, and much love to you, man. Thank you for taking the time.
It's always a pleasure. Anytime, my friend.
Love always, Lee. Be good.
You too, man.
All right,
Take care, Jim.
All right. Just heard from a legendary human being and a great bass player, Leland Sklar. We'll be right back on the other side of the music with Marco Benevento.